Hi guys, so today we're going to go through the ATP PC system. So this is one of the three energy systems that both AQA and OCR want you to be able to explain and also evaluate. So with the three energy systems, one thing to be careful of, if it's a shorter mark question, so like not the 20 marker for OCR and not the 8 or the 15 marker for AQA. If it's a short mark question, if they just ask you to evaluate an energy system, you don't get credit for showing the examiner that you know the reactions going on. They purely just want pros and cons. Whereas if it says explain or describe an energy system, that's where you get the credit for explaining the reactions within each energy system. So just be careful in the shorter mark questions. What's the command word? If it's describe or explain, show them that you know all of the reactions that we're going to go through now. If it's evaluate, you only need to put pros and cons. So just be aware of that. So the ATP PC system, it's examined pretty much the same in AQA and OCR. The only subtle difference is that with AQA, whenever you think you need to talk about this energy system, they give you a mark first for just mentioning that the athlete would utilize their stored ATP first, and then this ATP PC system would take over. Whereas for OCR, they just want you to go straight into what's going on in this ATP PC system. There's not really much mention of the fact that the athlete would use stored ATP first and then start utilizing this energy system. So that's the only subtle difference. If you're an AQA student and you think that the question is about this energy system, just throw in for one mark at the start that, before this energy system kicks into action, the 2 to 3 seconds worth of stored ATP would be utilized first, and then go into mentioning this energy system. So with the ATP PC system, this is the one that's used during really high intensity, short duration work. And in terms of the duration, it's up to 10 seconds. So anything that you think is really high intensity, but lasts for less than 10 seconds, this will be the predominant energy system. And remember, you are always using all three energy systems all at the same time. It's just that one will be the predominant one, whereas the other two won't be working as hard to provide ATP at any given time. So for example, right now, because I'm at a low intensity for a long duration, my aerobic system will be the predominant energy system, providing energy for ATP resynthesis. But my ATP PC and glycolytic systems, they still will be working right now, but they will be hardly contributing to ATP production. Whereas with this ATP PC system, this would be the predominant energy system in something like a 100-meter sprint, a shot put, a javelin throw, a weightlifting competition, anything like that. So this is anything that's really high intensity, but for a short duration, and specifically that duration is anything less than 10 seconds. And we're going to speak about why. Now, the ATP PC system is an anaerobic energy system, so it's without oxygen, and it happens in a place called the sarcoplasm. And let's say this is a muscle cell with a nucleus, and let's just draw a mitochondria for now. The sarcoplasm is the liquid part of the cell. So the sarcoplasm and the cytoplasm are the same thing. It's just the sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm of a muscle cell in particular. So you can either write that the ATP-PC system happens in the sarcoplasm, which is what I'd personally do, or you could put it happens in the cytoplasm of a muscle cell. You just have to write a bit more, so it's a bit pointless. You may as well just put sarcoplasm. So the ATP-PC system is happening in the sarcoplasm. And the PC stands for phosphocreatine. And you store phosphocreatine in the sarcoplasm as well. So all of your phosphocreatine stores are found in the sarcoplasm of your muscle cells. And just to make a synoptic link here with diet and nutrition and ergogenic aids, anyone that supplements with creatine, so if you're supplementing with creatine right now, the sole reason that you're doing it, even if you don't know why you're doing it, is to increase your phosphocreatine stores. So if I draw in purple what would happen if you supplemented with creatine, it would simply allow you to store even more phosphocreatine in the sarcoplasm. So that is the sole benefit of creatine supplementation. It increases your phosphocreatine stores, and that will then hopefully prolong the use of this ATP-PC system. So instead of only being able to use it for 10 seconds, you might be able to use it for 12 to 15 seconds, let's say. So it's not like a miracle worker, it's a legal supplement. So it's not going to do anything amazing, but out of the legal supplements, it's probably the most beneficial one. And the way it works is it just allows you to store more phosphocreatine. So the body or the muscle cells have plenty of phosphate floating around, but there's limited creatine. So that's why you supplement with creatine so that you can store more phosphocreatine. And this is actually the reason behind the 10-second cutoff point. So the body's not very good at storing phosphocreatine, and you only have enough for around 10 seconds worth of high intensity activity. And after that 10-second mark, you've just depleted all of your phosphocreatine stores. You've run out of phosphocreatine, and therefore you have to switch to the glycolytic system. However, if you do supplement with creatine, it does allow you to utilize this energy system for slightly longer because you've got more phosphocreatine stores. So let's have a look at, so the reason I mentioned the ergogenic aids bit there is because for AQA, they've definitely done this. I've never seen it in OCR, but they could definitely do it with OCR as well, is they could do a synoptic long mark question where they expect you to know what supplement benefits what energy system. And for this energy system, the supplement is definitely creatine. So creatine is the supplement you take to enhance the ATP-PC system. So let's have a look at what's happening to that phosphocreatine now. So this is what's happening in the ATP-PC system. And remember, this is all taking place in the sarcoplasm. So you start with this phosphocreatine molecule. This is the fuel source, and it's just a phosphate and a creatine bound together. And within that bond, there's a load of potential energy that will need to be released. And what happens is this enzyme here, creatine kinase, so a kinase enzyme most of the time breaks something down. So creatine kinase is breaking down this phosphocreatine into just the two things that it's made up of, a phosphate and a creatine. But most importantly, when that bond is broken, that releases energy. And you must mention that in your answer, that the breakdown of phosphocreatine via creatine kinase produces a phosphate, a creatine, and energy. You have to mention and energy to get the mark. Now, that energy isn't ATP directly. It's energy that is then used to resynthesize ATP. And this is an important concept as well, the concept of a coupled reaction. So a coupled reaction is where the products of one reaction are used in a completely separate reaction. And all three of your energy systems work via coupled reactions. So all three of the energy systems, as it says in their name, release energy. And that energy is then used in this completely separate reaction here. Now, if a reaction is releasing energy, it's known as an exothermic reaction. So you can remember EX for exiting. The energy is exiting the reaction. So all three of the energy systems, ATP, PC, glycolytic, and aerobic, they're all exothermic reactions. And then the energy that is released from those exothermic reactions is then used in this endothermic reaction. So this is always the endothermic reaction that the energy from any of the three energy systems is being used in. So you've got an ADP molecule, you've got a phosphate, and then that energy that's come from this reaction here, that energy is being used to stick that phosphate back onto ADP to make ATP. And it just happens that in this energy system, the amount of energy that is released from the breakdown of one phosphocreatine, that energy is enough to resynthesize one ATP. So there is one ATP that is resynthesized per phosphocreatine molecule that you break down. So there's a 1-to-1 ratio. Every phosphocreatine you break down, that helps to resynthesize 1 ATP. So overall there, to get maximum marks, you would say that phosphocreatine is broken down via creatine kinase into a phosphate, a creatine, and energy, and that's known as an exothermic reaction. And then that energy is used in a completely separate reaction, and then you'd write out this reaction where ADP plus P plus energy goes to 1 ATP. And then you just throw in that phrase there that this is known as a coupled reaction, where the products of one reaction are used in a separate reaction. And then throw in the fact that this is all happening in the sarcoplasm as well. That'll get you a mark. And most of the time as well, more for OCR, you get a mark for just saying that it's anaerobic as well. So for acknowledging that it's not utilizing oxygen. So if they ask you to describe or explain the ATP-PC system, everything that we've mentioned there is what you'd want to include. Most of the time, they don't directly tell you to talk about the ATP-PC system. They'll want you to work out that this is the energy system they want you to talk about. So they might say something along the lines of the outline or explain how a 100-meter sprinter resynthesizes ATP during the race, something along those lines. So you'd get a mark for just identifying that it's the ATP-PC system that's the most dominant one. So that's how you explain what's going on in the ATP-PC system. Underneath, I have just written it all out as well, but everything that is mentioned there is literally what I've just outlined here. This is purely just for your notes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they would expect you to be able to apply it practically, so knowing practical examples of when this energy system is most dominant: 100-meter sprint, powerlifting, javelin, shot put, a tackle in rugby, anything like that. And then they could ask you to evaluate the energy system. So this is just the pros and cons. Now, there isn't like, I don't think you should just have separate lists of things that you should be remembering as pros and cons. You just use your knowledge of what's going on in the energy system to come up with pros and cons. So firstly, I'd be saying, well, this is a rapid reaction. There's only one reaction involved here. So a good thing about this energy system is that it resynthesizes ATP rapidly. So it allows you to perform at a high intensity. Without this energy system, you wouldn't be able to work at high intensity. So there's two of your positives already. Quick resynthesis of ATP allows for high intensity work. Although it's an anaerobic energy system, it doesn't produce a fatiguing byproduct, doesn't produce lactic acid. That's a good thing. But the negatives, as we mentioned earlier, it can only be utilized for 10 seconds. So it's got a really short duration, and that's because of limited phosphocreatine stores. And then you could also mention that it has a really low yield of ATP as well. So do you see there? I've already come up with all the pros and cons. I haven't had to revise separate lists. I've just used my knowledge of what's going on in the ATP-PC system. Now, one thing, a positive that you can mention, it's to do with another topic called EPOC, but it relates to this topic. So you know how we've said that unfortunately after 10 seconds you've run out of all your phosphocreatine stores. That's a negative thing, that you run out of phosphocreatine really quickly. But a really good thing about phosphocreatine is to go from 0 to 50% of your phosphocreatine stores. That only takes the body 30 seconds to do that. To go from 0 to 75% of your phosphocreatine stores, that only takes the body a minute. And then to go from 0 to 100% phosphocreatine stores, so to go from you've completely depleted your stores back to full stores of phosphocreatine, that only takes the body 3 minutes to do that. So although you run out of phosphocreatine really quickly, you can actually replenish your stores rapidly. And that's why that if you are in the gym and you're doing like heavy weightlifting, ideally, if you have the time, you should take around a 3-minute rest period in between each set. And that's just so for the next set, you've then got your full phosphocreatine stores ready to go again. So that is a positive of the ATP-PC system, is that you can replenish the fuel source really quickly. You talk about this in EPOC. This happens in the alactacid stage of EPOC, the fast stage of EPOC, but it is relevant here as a positive of this energy system. So just to reiterate that, the pros of this energy system: it produces ATP rapidly. You can replenish your phosphocreatine stores rapidly as well. It only takes 3 minutes to get all your phosphocreatine back again. It allows you to perform at a high intensity because it resynthesizes ATP so quickly, and it doesn't produce any lactic acid, which is a good thing as well. However, the cons: it hardly produces any ATP, so only 1 ATP per phosphocreatine molecule, so it has a really low yield when compared to, let's say, the aerobic system, that per glucose molecule, the aerobic system produces 38 ATP. You can only use it for up to 10 seconds at a time, and that's because you've got limited stores of phosphocreatine in the sarcoplasm. So those two slides there are just if you had to evaluate the use of this energy system. And as we've said, some examples there of when the ATP-PC system is most dominant, like a 100-meter sprint. So that is all the content for the ATP-PC system. I'd say it's the nicest of the three energy systems because there's the least amount going on. There's only the one reaction that you have to outline. So let's have a look at how they ask about this for OCR and AQA, and then how you're going to answer that question and what's in the mark schemes. So this is an OCR question. So we've got this first question here, and then a very similar question below, but these are quite direct because they're telling you what energy system to talk about. So remember, they wouldn't have to do that. So you've got some short mark questions here, just asking like when the ATP-PC system would be most dominant. This is what I was on about, where they're not going to tell you to talk about the energy system. So this says, describe the predominant energy system which resynthesizes ATP while performing the long jump in athletics. So here you would get 1 out of the 5 marks would be for identifying that it's the ATP-PC system. And then because it's described, you talk about like that it happens in the sarcoplasm, that it's where phosphocreatine is broken down by creatine kinase into a phosphate, a creatine, and energy. We'll have a look at the mark scheme for that now. And then underneath, it wants you to evaluate the effectiveness of it for 3 marks. So there's the evaluate part and the describe part all in one here. So let's have a look at the mark scheme for question 6. So this is the describe part. So you get a mark for acknowledging that it's the ATP-PC system that would be most dominant because it didn't tell you to talk about it in the question. Phosphocreatine is broken down into a phosphate, a creatine, and energy. Notice energy is underlined. That energy is then used to resynthesize ATP in this completely separate reaction. And that is known as a coupled reaction. So you get credit there for referencing the concept of a coupled reaction. It's anaerobic. The controlling enzyme is creatine kinase. It happens in the sarcoplasm, and it produces 1 ATP per phosphocreatine molecule. So we've mentioned all of that, and that would have allowed us to get all of those possible mark points, even though it's only a 5 marker. So that's the description of the ATP-PC system. And then this is the evaluation of it. So the good things: it's a quick reaction, or it allows you to resynthesize ATP rapidly. That allows you to work at a high intensity. It's anaerobic, so there's no delay for waiting for oxygen to be delivered to the working muscle. There's no lactic acid production, which is a good thing. And this is the point about the resynthesis of the phosphocreatine of the fuel source. So it only takes 3 minutes to fully replenish all of your phosphocreatine. So that's a positive as well. And then finally, you've got the negatives here. So it only lasts for 8 to 10 seconds, and that's because of the limited stores of phosphocreatine. And it only produces 1 ATP per phosphocreatine. So it has a low yield of ATP. So that was a describe and an evaluate question for OCR. And then if we have a look at a question for AQA, remember at the start of this video, I mentioned that the only difference with AQA really is that you get credit for mentioning that you'd use your stored ATP first and then go into the ATP PC system. So this says explain how energy is provided, allowing the athlete to complete the shot put. So again, they haven't told you what energy system, so you're going to get a mark for saying that it's the ATP PC system. So this is 3 marks. Let's have a look at what's in the mark scheme for question 11. So firstly, you use up your stored ATP, in which you have about 2 to 3 seconds worth. Then the ATP PC system will be the predominant one here. It is where phosphocreatine is broken down into a creatine, a phosphate, and energy. And then that energy is used to resynthesize ATP. And then I don't think some of these mark schemes are great for AQA, but I would say via a coupled reaction. I'd mention creatine, kinase. I'd mention that it happens in the sarcoplasm. This is quite a limited mark scheme here, but you can see you definitely got enough detail to get full marks there. So that's the ATP PC system all done. I hope you guys found that useful. Let me know in the comments if there are any other topics that you'd like me to run through. And in the description of this video, I'll include links to my website if you do want any support more on a one-to-one basis. I offer online tutoring. I can help you with your EAPI if you're an OCR student. I can help you with your written coursework if you're an AQA student. And I can help you prepare for those exams as well. So as I say, if there are any other topics you want me to go through, just drop them in the comments.